The debate over the country's rising debt profile has dominated public space for a while now. While critics are unanimous in agreement that borrowing is not leprosy, in the words of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, they are worried about the debts not being tied to regenerative projects. However, reacting to such views, the Director General of the Budget Office of the Federation, Dr. Tanimu Yakubu, describes such criticisms as economic illiteracy born out of moral outrage. Joining us to point out deliberately neglected alternatives to borrowing for the funding of infrastructure is Dr. Paul Alaje, Chief Economist at SPM Professionals. Good morning, Dr. Paul Alaje, and good to have you again on the morning show. Very quickly, the president has been quoted as saying borrowing.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Thank you. The president has been quoted as saying borrowing is not leprosy, and that if you borrow, we will pay back. Now, I think it's the ADC that has said, well, Nigeria is borrowing too much, and it has become a Ponzi scheme. Now, some people say, well, you know, ADC and the opposition parties are responding out of emotion, and that a country must borrow to fund the development. Some other people say, well, where is the productivity? Even if we say we're going to pay back, you know, there's no productivity, and we should not compare Nigeria's debt service to GDP ratio as we have done on this same table, citing the examples of Japan, the United Kingdom, South Africa, and even the United States. However, Nigerians are worried about the high rate of borrowing. We're even preparing to borrow $1.5 million, or is it billion, from the World Bank. They say Nigeria is in talks. But once Nigerians hear borrowing, they are worried because they say we borrow, we don't see the purpose or the process or the outcome. What are your recommendations?
Thank you so much once again for having me, sir. When it comes to borrowing, it's a very sensitive subject. Economics around the world and the government, political leaders are also concerned. And those that are not concerned, I think they should be. Truly, borrowing is not leprosy. Borrowing itself is neither good nor bad. When we discuss borrowing, there are parameters objectively economics look at. The least of this parameter is your debt to GDP because they are both stock. They are not flow variables. So if they are stock variables, it is really very important to look beyond those and look at what is flow. And when we discuss what is flow, we now talk about debt service versus revenue because it is money earned that we use to service. So for countries, the recommendation globally and professionally is 33.3%. That is, not more than 1/3 of countries' revenue should be used to service debt. In the previous administration, Nigeria went as high as 97% of all revenue to service debt. We say that borrowing was not a concern as of that time. The answer will be no. Borrowing definitely was concerned because we spend 97% of all revenue not to pay National Assembly vehicles that many have complained about, not to build schools, not to build bridges, just to service debt. So the question is, how did we live in that particular year? And this is not my quote. You can check it online. It was the immediate past Minister of Finance that said it at the floor of National Assembly, and also granting interviews with journalists that mentioned over 90% and maybe 97, actually about 97% were used to service debt. In the current dispensation, that has been brought down moderately. However, it is still above 60%. So should we say that it's absolutely not a concern? I'll tell you that based on that condition. But the last condition that you look at for borrowing, whether it's a concern or not, or before we get to what alternative we have, is that we need to check the impact of debt on the economy. As is this debt impacting us positively? If we use debt generically now and professionally speaking to build infrastructure, to build hospitals, to improve human capital development, then those are good borrowing, because all of those things you do will be used to repay back. The human capital will generate more revenue, government collects the revenue as part of taxes to pay back debt. Again, even infrastructure, such infrastructure to be monetized, the monetization of the infrastructure, the revenue that comes will be used to pay back debt. In the case of Nigeria, it's really not clear, and I say this with all sense of decency, because when National Assembly announces amount we want to borrow, it's not all the time that those financial announcements is tied to something in particular. For some of the time, yes, but in some cases, not exactly so. So if you are borrowing, no borrowing should go into consumption. It is a waste of money. In fact, it brings the country on its knees. Such borrowing, we call it survivor borrowing. For productive borrowing, which is encouraged by professional economists around the world, should go purely into capital expenditure. So when you look at how our GDP has grown over the years, I can say in the last 20 years, compare that to how our debt profile has grown in the last 20 years, then you see a major disparity. And I can confirm to you, Doctor, that this perhaps is the reason why many Nigerians are concerned about borrowing in our country today.
Thank you so much for setting the scene, Dr. Paul Alaje. We had a conversation with Professor Akpanekpo last week, trying to unpack this similar issue. And one of the questions I had asked him is, well, we're sitting with over 60% on our debt service to revenue ratio. Most global economists would consider that a crisis. I want to know, by your definition, is Nigeria in a debt crisis?
Well, when I say, I would not want to say we're in a debt crisis, but we are faced with a major concern because we're a developing country. So we cannot root out the fact that we are not having enough revenue, or maybe I should say we are not optimizing alternatives, which includes public-private partnership, monetization of assets. For Nigeria, it's important to copy correctly. We cannot compare economy to what is happening in the UK or what's happening in the US. Those are far developed nations. Countries that we need to look at includes countries such as Brazil, and they've looked for alternatives for revenues beyond regular traditional tax alternative. It will not be sufficient. And I will tell you why. It is easy to say that, oh, Nigeria has a population of over 200 million people. You need to know that from the 200 million people, again, not my figures, World Bank says 140 million plus are living below poverty line. And the common saying in economics, and for those of us in finance, we say you cannot tax poverty. So those that are poor, remove them. Those are below poverty. Those that are in poverty is the next layer. Then you have those that are living barely above poverty line. Then you have approximately over 170 million people. The remaining 30 million people is where to play. So when you are talking of tax revenue from companies, corporations, and from individual, the population you can tax is really low. And that is why President Buhari of blessed memory says the real worry Nigeria has when he was presenting 2019 budget in 2018 was revenue. So for me, I would say we are faced with a major debt concern right now. Now, it gets back to debt crisis. When you cross that boundary of 75%, then you are back in debt crisis. We were in debt crisis under President Buhari administration. We have moved to step concern, but we have never been in the last, say, 10, 20 years in safe corridor of debt profile. And it is important for those in offices to know that we came to 60 or 70% or above 60%. We are not yet safe. So whatever we do to bring us back to safe corridor, it is what should be concern of everybody.
Okay. I would like to paint a scenario, and good to see you again, Dr. Alaje. A country
Thank you so much, sir.
that doesn't hit revenue targets, which revenue is a problem, but the country borrows a lot, then the country now devalued its currency. And the country is now complaining now that the reason why our debt is high was because it devalued. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. You have just painted recipe for self-destruction. There is a paper I put up, which is chasing one's tail. It's like a dog that wants to chase his tail, hoping that we pull it out, not knowing that it's looking for its own death. This is the real a scenario that we have faced as a country over the years. We devalue. When we devalue, our revenue appears to go up, and we are happy. Oh, we are now giving states more money. We are doing more to local government, not knowing that what we did was just to add water to our Ijebu Gari. The content of Gari we have is still the same. In economics and professionally, we call it money illusion. We have really not built more wealth. And people say, oh, but we have more money. Hold on. Convert what we had in 2022, 2020, 2015, what we had as revenue as a nation, convert it to the dollar. Convert the same to the dollar today and check if it ever gets up to 20% higher. So when you devalue, one thing will happen. I mentioned to you, Mr. Rufai, in 2022 thereabout, or 2021, I think 2021, 2022, when Nigeria devalued, 1 trillion naira was added that same day to our debt profile. And people wonder, why did I say so? I said, hold on, check what we were holding and check what we now hold with the new devalued rates. More so that time we devalued by, I think, about 150 naira or so. Check what the devaluation looked like between 2023 and 2026. Thankfully, it even came down from 1.9 after I said it would get about 1.5, and everybody felt it was not possible. Today, it has gone down to about 1.350, 1.360, around 1,400. But check the value. So our debt profile will go up. That shows that the person that said it, which of course was in the fiscal arm of the economy, is not perhaps looking at it. Maybe there was not enough coordination between fiscal and monetary at the time. That was why that came up. But the question authority have said is that, oh, we just have to devalue. Well, I've made my opinion known. It was all over the place, both in print media and in electronic media. And I believe that in the nearest future, before we make some economic policy, we can subject it to different economic thought, different economic review, different schools of economic thought. Then we can take what is it that is best for us, one, as a developing nation, two, as a nation that already have enough in a sport, and we need to find solution. At the end of the day, the parameter for measuring progress for a nation is one, the well-being of the people, two, infrastructure that the country. And when you talk about well-being, we are not just saying that people are feeling well, is one. We're also talking of quality of education, human capital development. And when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking of beyond road, rails, electricity, and all of the critical things that should be available in a nation, among so many other ones.
Among so many other things, I know one of the biggest debates happening now is about the future of the interest rate and what CBN should do to try and stimulate some growth. But hopefully we can have that conversation in another session. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul Alaje, for shedding some very important insight on this issue.